What dark secrets lie hidden in the shadows of an old motel? A blood-curdling scream and strange happenings leave a group of students questioning their safety. But the terror was only just beginning. Before I settled in New York City, I used to take a lot of road trips. One evening, I found myself driving through a small town in Delaware called Milford. I had plans to head down to Rehoboth Beach the next day, which was about 45 minutes away. However, I wanted to avoid the hassle, so I decided to leave after work. By the time I hit the road, it was around 6 p.m., and my journey ended up taking a little over 5 hours. Since I was only going to be in Milford for a short while, I booked a motel for the night. Motel stays were a regular part of my travels, so I was pretty familiar with the whole setup. I messaged the owner before I left, asking if I could rent his $50 place. The photos online made it look nice enough, but the owner seemed a little sketchy from the start. We went back and forth a bit, and after some negotiation, he agreed. He mentioned that his father would be dropping off the key for me, but he also gave me a heads up about a lot of tropical plants in the kitchen that he wouldn't be able to move on such short notice. I wasn't too concerned. I was just looking for a place to sleep for a few hours and planned to leave first thing in the morning. I arrived around 11 o'clock or 11:30 p.m., and if you've ever been to Milford, you'll know it's in the middle of nowhere. The house I was renting was part of a tiny gated community, maybe 15 to 20 houses at most, and it was pitch black outside. When I pulled up, I grabbed my usual travel essentials, a duffel bag, a backpack, a jacket, and an extra one just in case. I used the key code to open the lockbox and took out the key. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed to the silence of the area. It felt like the loudest noise for miles. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and something just feels off, like maybe you shouldn't be there? That's exactly what I felt. I shook off the unease and set my bags down on a recliner. As promised, the kitchen was full of tropical plants, as if it were some sort of indoor jungle. I decided to explore the place, hoping to find a comfy spot to rest. The living room was decent, but when I peeked into the first bedroom, I was greeted by something unsettling. Dolls from the 1950s scattered everywhere. The bed had twin-size mattresses, no bed frame, and was just sitting on the floor without any sheets. Yeah, no thanks. I quickly moved on to the next room. Here, I found a collection of nutcracker figures, more unsettling than charming. The bed had a single sheet and no pillows, just a bare mattress. I went to turn on the light, but the switch didn't work. At this point, the place was starting to feel like something straight out of a horror movie, but I was too tired to care. I thought about leaving, but the exhaustion from the long drive weighed heavily on me. I decided to just crash for the night and get out of there as soon as the sun came up. The only switch in the room. Oh, wait, there was no light in the room at all. The switch didn't seem to connect to anything. All right, scratch that room too. I decided I'd just crash on the couch. At this point, the place was making me uneasy, but I knew I only had to endure it for one night. Feeling hungry, I left to grab something to eat from the only place still open, a Food Lion. It was about to close in 15 minutes. So I rushed in and grabbed some pizza bites and a peach Snapple. Real classy, right? When I got back to the house, I was still feeling off. So I set up my GoPro while I was gone, just to capture anything strange that might happen. Upon my return, I immediately checked around to make sure everything was as I left it. Good sign, right? Everything was still in place. I took the SD card out of the GoPro and popped it into my laptop to review the footage. Unfortunately, I still have the footage somewhere, but I wish you could have seen this place. It really looked like the kind of place where you might spend your last moments. But as I scrolled through the footage, there was nothing. The camera caught absolutely nothing. It was well past midnight by now. I had a full day of work ahead and had driven a lot. So I decided I would sleep on the small couch the place offered. The apartment had a tiny 19-inch TV, but it didn't have a power cable. And the only outlet near the couch was just far enough away that my phone couldn't reach it to charge. Not that it would have mattered. Anyway, at the time I had Sprint, and they had terrible service. And where I was, there was no signal at all. I kept the light on. I know it's silly, but even though I was an adult, the light gave me some comfort. About an hour passed, and I still couldn't sleep, so nature called. I got up, and headed to the bathroom. The bathroom was dimly lit with a neon yellow glow, and the shower didn't have a curtain. But let me backtrack a little. The kitchen had hardwood floors, those kind of floors that, when you drag a chair across them, make that screeching noise we're all familiar with. Remember that. It'll play a role soon. So, there I was in the bathroom, doing my business, reading the label on a bottle because my phone was charging outside the bathroom. Convenient, right? Well, not that it mattered much. As I mentioned, I didn't have any service. I was sitting there, just passing time, when I heard it. The screeching of a chair on the faux hardwood floor. It was being pulled gently, like someone had just sat down. The sound lasted just as long as it would take for someone to settle into a seat. I almost threw my heart up when I heard it. And then, just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, the sound of fingers rhythmically tapping on top of the wooden kitchen table began. The tapping grew faster, more urgent, frozen. I was stunned. Good thing I was already on the toilet, because I couldn't even move. I sat there, trying to calm myself down, repeating over and over, I messed up. I sat there for 2 to 3 minutes, debating what to do. The tapping stopped, but my mind was racing. I couldn't just stay in there forever. Whoever was out there already knew I was here. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I was going to face whatever was out there. I grabbed the Bowie knife I always carry in my backpack when I travel and steel myself to defend myself. I figured if someone was there, they weren't looking for a conversation or a game of checkers. I rushed out the door, heart pounding in my chest. But when I reached the living room, there was nothing. No one. No sign of anyone at all. The chairs weren't even moved. At that moment, I didn't care to investigate further. I packed my stuff as if the place was burning down and bolted out of there. I jumped in my car and drove to the Holiday Inn an hour away at 3 a.m. I was so shaken that when I told the guy at the desk what had happened, he let me check into a room that wasn't supposed to be ready until 3 p.m. the next day. I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere safe. He gave me a king-size room, and I collapsed into the bed, not even bothering to think about what had just happened. Now another story. I used to work at a small motel in London, not one of the nice, touristy places, but just an ordinary spot where weary travelers stop for a night's rest. My job was simple enough. Check guests in and out, tidy up rooms, handle complaints, and make sure nothing unusual happened. Most nights were quiet, just a slow passing of time as I sat behind a reception desk, reading magazines and sipping lukewarm coffee to stay awake. But one particular evening stands out clearly. It was late November, and outside the windows, London was shrouded in a misty, cold drizzle. The lobby felt quieter than usual, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. The old heater hummed quietly, doing its best to fend off the chill that seeped through the gaps around the door. The place felt lonelier that night, but there was nothing that hinted at the chaos that was about to unfold. It was just past 10 o'clock when the lobby door creaked open, the rusty bell ringing above it. The sound startled me, and I glanced up from my magazine, already sensing something wasn't quite right. I glanced up from my magazine and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was of average height, his hair messy and greasy, sticking out at odd angles. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his clothes were unkempt, like he had been sleeping outside for several nights. He glanced around nervously before approaching the desk. A wave of discomfort washed over me immediately, but I reminded myself that it wasn't unusual to see exhausted or troubled people at the motel. I handed him a room key after he quietly paid in cash, mumbling something incoherent as he took it. I watched him shuffle down the hallway, hoping he would just go to sleep, and that would be the end of it. For about an hour, things were calm. I cleaned up around the lobby, tried to relax, and distracted myself with more reading. But just after midnight, strange sound began echoing from the corridor, scraping furniture and muffled voices. Curious and slightly annoyed, I left my desk to investigate. The hallway was eerily quiet, and when I paused outside his door, there was nothing to hear. I shook my head, telling myself that fatigue was probably messing with my mind, and headed back to the lobby. Just as I settled back into my chair, the sounds returned, louder and more frantic this time. A door slammed violently, the echo ringing down the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and I rushed to see what was going on. Before I could reach the man's room, the door swung open abruptly, startling me. There he stood, eyes wide and breathing heavily. Without a word, he pushed past me and entered another empty room. Confused and growing more concerned, I followed cautiously, trying to stay calm. Inside the room, I found him standing beside the bed, muttering incoherently. In a frenzy, he grabbed a mattress, flipped it off the bed frame, and began tearing at the sheets as if desperately searching for something hidden. I tried to reason with him, asking him to stop, but my words fell on deaf ears. He was lost in his own world, destroying the room, tossing pillows, lamps, and bedside tables aside. The scene was escalating, and I felt helpless. Realizing I needed backup, I quickly moved toward the phone. Before I could reach it, I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Jack, one of the night security staff. A regular at the motel, Jack was tall, solidly built, and always remained calm, even in the most stressful situations. I felt a wave of relief flood over me when I saw him step into the room without hesitation. Jack moved slowly toward the stranger, trying to calm him down. Jack moved carefully toward the man, trying to calm him down, but instead, the stranger lashed out wildly. His fists flew, and his eyes were filled with rage. Jack was prepared, but the struggle was chaotic and violent, making the small room feel even smaller as they wrestled against the walls and furniture. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in panic, unsure of what to do. The noise of the struggle echoed in my ears, and every second felt like an eternity. Then, after what felt like an age, Jack finally managed to pin the man down on the carpeted floor. "Call the police now," Jack shouted urgently, his breath ragged from the fight. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to pick up the bedside phone, dialing as quickly as I could manage. The dispatcher answered calmly, asking me questions as Jack held the man down. The tension in the room was unbearable. It felt like hours before I finally heard the wail of sirens approaching. Breaking through the quiet of the night, the police burst in, taking swift control of the situation. 2 officers carefully lifted the stranger off the floor and secured him in handcuffs. He resisted violently, screaming and thrashing, but the officers managed to get him outside, his protest fading as they led him away. With him gone, the room was eerily silent. The chaos was gone, but the damage was done. Furniture overturned, sheets torn, and the space now a disheveled mess. It was a stark reminder of the violence we had just witnessed. The rest of the night was a blur. There was police questioning, taking statements, and filing reports. Jack sat quietly beside me, both of us recounting the events repeatedly. Several disturbed guests who had heard the noise also gave their statements. It turned out the man had been involved in similar incidents before, driven by personal issues and substance abuse. Knowing the truth didn't make me feel any better. The anxiety from the whole ordeal lingered, making it difficult to shake the feeling of vulnerability. After everything was over, I sat back in the lobby, the heater humming as if nothing had happened. Dawn slowly arrived, the mist outside thinning as daylight broke through. My shift ended quietly. But as I walked home, exhaustion weighing heavily on my bones, I couldn't help but reflect. In familiar surroundings, we can sometimes feel the most vulnerable. Even after that night, I continued working at the motel, but each late shift afterward brought a quiet dread. Every time the lobby door creaked open, my heart would jump nervously. The strange man's desperate, wild eyes haunted my memories, reminding me just how easily a normal night could turn into something terrifying. Now a few years ago when I was in high school, my history class took a trip to Belgium. We were all GCSE students, excited about the adventure ahead. But little did we know, this trip would turn into something unforgettable. It turned out to be a trip we'd never forget, but not for the reasons we had hoped. It all started when our bus pulled up to a rundown motel on the outskirts of a small town. The building looked ancient, its paint peeling off the walls, and ivy creeping up the sides like something out of an old horror movie. Our teacher, Mr. Thompson, assured us it was the only place available for miles around, so reluctantly, we filed inside. As we checked in, the receptionist handed us a set of keys with an odd warning. Stay out of the basement. It was a strange request, but we shrugged it off. We were more interested in exploring the town than dwelling on it. Our room was on the top floor, which meant a long climb up creaky stairs. The hallway was dimly lit, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move along the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in my chest as we reached our room. Inside, the atmosphere was stale and musty, as if the air hadn't been disturbed in decades. The furniture looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s, and the curtains were threadbare, barely keeping out the fading light. We quickly claimed our beds, but no one seemed eager to explore the rest of the motel. As night fell, the darkness outside seemed to seep into the room, making it feel even more claustrophobic. Mr. Thompson tried to lighten the mood by suggesting we order some food and watch a movie, but the tension in the air wouldn't go away. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains sent shivers down my spine. When someone mentioned needing to use the bathroom, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The bathroom was small and dingy, with cracked tiles and flickering lights. I hesitated before going alone, but my bladder won out over my fear. As I washed my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like something or someone was lurking just beyond the cracked door. I hurried back to the safety of our room, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling swirling in my stomach. When I mentioned it to my classmates, they laughed it off, attributing it to nerves and the creepy surroundings. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Objects started moving on their own. Strange noises echoed through the halls, and a chill settled over the room, one that had nothing to do with the weather. Outside, we tried to rationalize everything, blaming it on the old building and our overactive imaginations. But deep down, we all knew something was wrong. Just as we were starting to relax, the silence was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. We all shot up in bed, hearts pounding, straining to listen as the scream echoed to the motel. Without a word, we scrambled out of bed and huddled together in the center of the room, too terrified to move. Mr. Thompson tried to reassure us, but even he couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. We debated calling the police, but without knowing where the scream had come from, we were hesitant to leave the safety of our room. So we sat in terrified silence, waiting for any sign of danger. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the fear slowly began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of exhaustion. Eventually, we drifted off to sleep, too tired to keep our eyes open any longer. When we woke up the next morning, the motel was eerily quiet. There were no signs of commotion from the night before, no evidence that anything out of the ordinary had happened. We gathered our things in silence, too shaken to speak. As we made our way back to the bus, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were leaving something behind. Something dark and sinister, lurking in the shadows of that rundown motel. As we drove away, I glanced back at the building, feeling a chill run down my spine. The old structure stood there, silent and unassuming, but I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay hidden in the darkness.